So good morning, Brittany. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, and today we're going to talk about your new book. So you could just go ahead and tell us the title and any details you want anybody to know before we start with interview questions.
Okay, sure. It's called Tranquility Parenting, a guide to staying calm, mindful, and engaged. And it is available this week on Amazon, I believe. And it should be available from pretty much any online bookseller in the next month or two.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I was reading the introduction to the book, and I was wondering what you were cooking that involved rice and cucumbers and tomatoes.
Right. It was a cucumber and tomato salad
Oh,
and
that
my
sounds good.
risotto on the stove.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot that. That's right. It did say risotto. Um, you can get a contraption called a rice cooker. I have one. It's you just put in the rice in the water in the specific proportion. It's like 1 cup water to 2 cups, or 1 cup rice to 2 cups water. It's perfect. You'll never have to worry about burning rice again if you get
I
one.
could. Maybe I should do that. I'm so bad in the kitchen and I hate accumulating kitchen gadgets.
I
I'm
know,
kind
I know, I do too, but it's worth having. It's totally worth having.
Okay, good to
Yeah,
know. Thank you.
yeah. I've had it for a while. I asked for that when I graduated college. It's a useful gadget to have. But anyway, so let's get into the nitty gritty of your book here. So what led you to write the book?
Well, as you know, I discovered Stoicism a couple of years ago, and I talk about in the book the huge impact that this had on my life. I felt before I always wanted the best for my kids. I wanted to be the best mom I could. I wanted to do everything I could for them, but I didn't really have a clear sense of what the
Yeah,
best was. And so Stoicism kind of made me understand, okay, so this is what I need to be aiming for with my kids. And basically the idea is you teach for both yourself and your kids.
yeah,
You teach virtue and it leads to eudaimonia. So this is the ancient Greek concept of flourishing, being content, being self-sufficient. And I like the
yeah,
way A.A. Long puts it. He says, the best mindset that's available to humans. I love that. And so I realized, okay, so I want this for
yeah.
myself. I also want it for my kids. And so Stoicism has kind of become my guide for achieving a happy and fulfilling life for all of us. So, of course, I wanted to also share this with other parents
Yeah.
because I had never heard of it before. And I thought, well, I'm sure other people would want to hear about this too. So I wrote the book, and I do hope that it can help others to have a better life as well.
Yeah, that's great. Um, and so, well, what do you think that the approach in the book offers parents that other approaches might not offer?
Well, I grew frustrated. Of course, I read a lot of parenting books before I found Stoicism. And I was always frustrated that it seemed very superficial to me.
Mm.
You have so many different experts saying a whole range of different things. And it's like, how
And
do you choose?
they all contradict each other.
Right. I mean, you can go to the bookstore and there's a whole bookshelf of parenting books. And it's like, okay, what basis do I really have for choosing between these? And the more I read parenting advice in magazines, and lots of other places, you get it from everywhere. It all just seems very superficial. So, what I love about
Yeah,
Stoicism
okay.
is that it offers kind of an anchor and a compass. It's very, very deep, and it has what I talk about in the book is deep roots. You need
Yeah,
deep roots to establish a way of life for yourself and your child, and that's what I think Stoicism can offer. So, no, they don't give you the specifics about what to do with your kids, but they give you kind of a compass and an anchor. And so I built
yeah,
on that to write the book.
yeah, that's great. Would you like to summarize some of the important points from the book, or would you like to leave that for last? Maybe we
Sure,
should leave
sure, I
that for
can go ahead
last.
and do that. Well, one of the main things that I try to emphasize is that we should really think deeply about what we're doing and be very intentional. And I know that's something that you try to do as well. And I think a lot of parents do
Yeah,
try to do that. And Stoicism is a great tool for being very intentional. And of course, one of the buzzwords these days is mindful. It's kind of the same thing.
yeah,
We're not just coasting by on autopilot,
yeah,
just blindly following convention or jumping around from one idea to the next. We really want to be intentional with what we're doing. So, what tranquility parenting can do and what Stoicism does is it helps us to think clearly. So, I kind of modified the Stoic ideas of the discipline of desire, assent, and action.
Yeah.
And I developed that into some maxims that we can use in tranquility parenting. So one of them is thinking clearly, one is acting wisely, and one is dealing with indifference. So I keep mentioning that throughout the book because it's a way that we can orient ourselves as you go about your daily life.
Yeah.
You want to think clearly about what you're doing, and then, of course, act wisely. Dealing with indifference, of course, is a specifically Stoic concept.
Yeah.
So indifference, for anyone who doesn't know, is anything that's outside of your realm of moral goodness or badness. Everything else is indifferent.
I struggle with that. I really don't fully accept that, Stoic view of indifference. I'm more of an Aristotelian. So, I don't know how successfully I'd be able to teach that to my children, considering that I don't fully buy it myself. I guess you can take what's useful and leave the rest, but...
Well, actually, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's another thing that I believe everybody should not just claim a philosophy without agreeing with it.
Yeah.
It's not a religion. They're not asking you to take anything on faith.
Yeah.
But I think there's still a value in sitting down and developing your own parenting philosophy. Even if you don't agree with Stoic principles at all, or even if you only agree partially, there's still value in defining what you do believe in, your core beliefs, because those are going to guide what you do, especially since we're always so rushed. We're rushing around. We don't have time to stop and think in the moment, okay, what does my philosophy need to be here? You need to have something at hand that you can apply automatically.
Yeah, I agree with that. So what are some strategies that you use for staying calm and mindful?
Well, of course, one of the very biggest ones in Stoicism is focusing on what you can control. And with kids, we all know that we can't fully control our kids. We can't control them at all. We can influence them.
Yeah.
And of course, we're responsible for taking care of them, doing our best to teach them the right way to act, etc. But we don't control them. So this, I think,
they control us more than we control them.
Well, honestly, yeah, if you let them control you. So that's one of the things that I have really worked on as I've been a Stoic is not actually letting my kids set the tone for things. If your kid does.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Sure.
I'm thinking more of a baby. You know what I mean? Because I have one, and so I'm thinking like, if she's crying, setting the tone is a different way of putting it. So I agree with that, but if she's crying, it's not like I can just let her cry. I have to go respond. Is what
Absolutely.
I meant by
Yes.
what she's doing is controlling me more than I'm controlling her.
Yes. Okay. You're right about that. I think as your kids get older, obviously your relationship with them changes. And another big component that I believe in is building a good relationship with your kids. This is actually something, I don't talk a whole lot about it in the book, but the older my kids get, the more I realize how important that is.
Yeah.
As far as getting them to, as far as being able to influence them to do what you'd like them to do.
Yeah. No, that is very important because if a lot of people have a very adversarial relationship with their children, and it's kind of sad, I think.
Right. And I think that does go back to control, because if you believe that your child should just do whatever you say when you say it, you basically believe that you should or can control them. And it doesn't really work that way. If the child doesn't want to do something, they're not going to do it. So as they get older and they have more autonomy, if you have a good relationship with them, you're going to be able to influence them to a much greater extent than if you have that adversarial relationship. Mm-hmm. And one thing I talk about a lot is don't start power struggles, because everybody loses when there's a power struggle. So what we want to do instead is take this approach. You're familiar with the term amathia, which Massimo Pigliucci talks about a lot. It's this idea that comes directly from Socrates and Plato.
Yeah.
People don't make mistakes willingly.
Yeah.
No one errs willingly. People do what makes sense to them. And this applies to criminals. It applies to children. It applies to all of us. If you think something is good for you to do, if it's to your benefit, that's how Epictetus puts it. If it's to your benefit, you're going to do it. So one way to change that relationship is to change your child's idea of what's to their benefit.
Yeah.
So if you can convince them that what you want them to do is to their benefit, they're going to do it. Yeah. So it's more about working with what you know about your child, use what you know about them. You're familiar with their habits, their preferences, what they like. So, it involves kind of like a relationship with any other person.
Yeah.
Just using what you know about them to show them that this is the right way to do things.
Yeah, that's very insightful. I'm thinking about how I might use that myself with my 3-year-old.
Yeah. Is he potty trained already?
Is he what?
Is he potty trained already?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is. He's been for a while.
Oh, good for him. One of the, I have a section in the back of the book with 10 real life scenarios where you can apply these principles. I kind of walk you through the steps. So if you wanted to know, okay, well, this is all theoretical, but how do I apply it in real life?
Yeah.
So I have some scenarios with younger kids, such as tantruming and potty training. And then with older kids, such as talking back, not doing homework, and then all ages in between, not getting along with siblings, competition, jealousy, other kids at school, things like that. So if anyone is interested in seeing, okay, step by step, how do I actually put these into practice?
Yeah.
They can find that in the last chapter.
Oh, that's great. I have not finished it yet, so I'm sure I'll get to that point.
Well, you are kind of busy, like all parents. I mean, that's the tough thing. It's hard to find time to actually sit down and think. So I tried to make it in pretty easily digestible chunks.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I've been impressed with what I've read so far. So I'm going to try to finish it as soon as I can. I'll add it to my reading list. I just get so discouraged when I look at how many things I'd like to read and how little time I have to read them. Go on.
Well, I was just going to say that's one of those indifference, right? So would you see that as an indifferent?
I don't know if it's indifferent or not. My mind's not working well this morning.
It's not in the realm of your goodness or badness, though. And that's one thing that I think is hard to accept. But when we're raising our kids, we feel so much responsibility for them. We feel that we're responsible for their behavior, I think. So sometimes if my kids are not behaving well at school, I feel like it's my fault. That's my first reaction. Oh, I'm a terrible mom. My kid's going to grow up to be a criminal, things like that. And it's really, we can only do our best. So I think it's really helpful if you're trying to achieve tranquility. It's really helpful to think about, okay, what can I actually control in this situation? I cannot actually control what he does or what she does. I can only control what I do.
They probably had too much sugar while they were at school or something like that.
Yeah. There's all kinds of things driving their behavior,
Yeah, there are a lot of factors. But yeah, my son usually acts terribly if he's had too much sugar. Either that or if he hasn't slept well. Either one of those things is almost guaranteed to produce negative behavior in him.
That's what I was going to say. Not enough sleep. That's the biggest thing, because then he can't control his impulses. He just does whatever comes into his head.
That's true for adults too. I mean, since I've had the baby, I've noticed if I have a bad night, my mood is so much worse. I have so much trouble with patience. I really have to check myself. And it's sleep is really underrated for mental health. I mean, yeah. I notice it so much if I have a really bad night. Hopefully I'm past most of that, at least now with this baby, but boy, is it hard to regulate even for an adult, it's hard to regulate your mood. That's why sleep deprivation is supposed to be like a form of like
torture.
Yeah, seriously, because you can go into like a state of psychosis if you go for several days without sleep. So it's underrated, really. But,
right.
But anyway, so now we had discussed this a bit in some of our previous videos, about how do you teach kids virtue, and what is virtue, in case, there's people watching who aren't familiar with Stoicism. So I would first probably try to define it in the Stoic context. But then also, how do you teach it to kids?
So the Stoic idea of virtue is that virtue is the only thing that's always good. And it's the things that are inside you that you can control. So everything outside of you, basically what other people do, even things like your possessions, your body, you really can't control. What you can control are your motives, your opinions, and your wisdom and your judgment. So this is very helpful, I think, as a parent, again, because you can't control your kids, but also it helps you to not hover over them because you realize that you can't control them, so you're not doing them any favors by helicoptering. It's better to just step back and give them some breathing space and let them discover what they can do on their own a little bit. I've been reading this really great book called The Self-Driven Child by Stix, Rudd, and Johnson. I don't know if you've heard of that. One of them is a neuropsychologist and a counselor. The other is a tutor. And they've seen many, many kids. They have tons of experience between them. And they've seen in our modern culture, kids are just stressed to death. Literally, they have anxiety, they have depression. They're afraid, if they don't get a high enough score on the SAT, their whole future is ruined. And a lot of it has to do with the parents kind of projecting their expectations onto the kids. So it's really unhealthy for parents to do that. And I think once we internalize the concept of virtue, we understand, my kid's life is not over if they don't get a good score on the SAT. My life is not over if my kid doesn't get into the college I want, if they don't adapt the career that I want. So it's a really great tool to help us stay tranquil in our own minds. And another term that I really like that Stix, Rudd, and Johnson use is they encourage parents to be a non-anxious presence in their child's life. And I love that term. I think it's exactly what Stoicism is saying too. If you are hovering and you're always worried that your child is going to make a wrong move, that's really bad for the child. They're going to become an anxious person, or depressed and give up and say, there's no point in me doing anything. Mom and dad are going to take care of it no matter what I do.
Yeah.
So I think having that defined goal of what we want for our kids and ourselves really helps guide all our actions. So our big decisions and our small ones.
Yeah, very interesting.
And okay, so you asked how to teach children that. So I mentioned before that I have the maxims that we use as adults: think clearly, act wisely, and deal with indifference. So kind of adapting those for kids in a very kid-friendly format that you can just pull out whenever you need. The 3 maxims are: don't get upset, just deal with the problem. So obviously kids get upset pretty easily over small things. And I think part of our job is to teach them, this is not the end of the world. You just pick yourself up and keep going. Another one, treat other people the way you want them to treat you. Obviously, kids need to learn this lesson very clearly, and it's a hard one. So it's good to be able to bring out the maxims so that they learn them well and they can actually start to internalize those.
Yeah.
The other one, you control yourself, not other people. This is really hard even for adults, right?
Yeah. I might challenge you a little bit on the first one. Because if you say don't get upset, that implies that what they are feeling is wrong, meaning they're more likely to repress certain things. I mean, which creates kind of a shadow self, and really negative shadow self as you grow older. I don't know. The way I try to look at it is that all emotions are okay, but all behaviors are not. At least until they're maybe with older children, that would start to change a bit. Like, you probably don't want to have a disproportionate, reaction to something. Like, what I'm thinking in terms of a 3-year-old, he's really upset about something. It's better not to tell him that his feelings are wrong. Better to say, I try to say, you're upset that you can't have a cookie, and you've already had one. You can't have another until after dinner, or something like that. Just acknowledge his feelings. But I mean, I definitely can see that might look a lot different for older kids. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you brought that up because there might be some confusion about that. I think Stoicism in general is criticized for this a lot. So it is really, we need to be very clear that it is not about suppressing emotions. Yeah. So the way that I see it for both adults and children is you're learning to use good judgment about what really matters in life and what doesn't. And so this is what we want to teach. It's what we want to use for ourselves, and we want to teach our kids as well. So yes, we're not into suppressing emotions. And I agree. I use that same strategy too, of talking about emotions. What I try to do, what I think Stoic philosophy really emphasizes, is changing your judgment. if you feel sad, and this goes for parents too, if your kid is doing something and you just keep getting more and more frustrated, you can't keep being patient because eventually you're going to crack, right?
Yeah.
You're going to lose it at some point. So the whole idea is that you want to remove your judgment that something bad is happening to you.
Yeah.
And we can teach our children to do this too. So on the parent level, I have a chapter on this as well. It's rethinking your value judgments. So I know you're familiar with Marcus's idea of you remove the value judgment at the end of impressions. So Stoics believe that impressions, there's no such thing, as we grow up, there's no such thing as us having a pure impression. We always add kind of the value ourselves. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my ego?
Yeah.
And what we need to do is learn how to remove that. So instead of having an example would be, okay, so I'm driving in my car, my kids are fighting in the back seat. I've had a long day, I'm stressed, I'm tired. The natural reaction would be to think to myself, oh, why are my kids fighing? What have I done to deserve kids like this? And so what we need to do is take that away.
I'm sorry. I'm just picturing a woe is me, but it is very stressful having kids.
Right. So it applies to any situation. You're trying to get your kid to get his shoes on in the morning. You're trying to get your teenager to practice piano, whatever it is. We automatically, if we're not thinking about it, if we're not careful, we add this layer of judgment for ourselves, and it's almost always negative. When something like this happens. We think the kid's bad, there's something wrong with me. And what we need to learn to do is just remove that. It's not true. It's an opinion. So when you take away that opinion, you're actually bringing your view of the world much more in line with reality. So
I completely agree with that. Completely agree with that part.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I mean with don't get upset. So I'm glad you mentioned that because that does need more explanation. So for your kid, for example, what you want to do is teach them, okay, so you can't get your shoes on, or for older kids, you didn't get the grade you wanted. Whatever it is, we need to talk them through the judgment they're making about that situation. It's not the end of the world. For younger kids, I try to really bring it down to their level. Try to make jokes, try to use their favorite superhero as an example, whatever it takes. Your child, so you make it understandable for them. But it's not about suppressing emotions. It's about changing the judgment. So absolutely, I completely agree with you that you wouldn't want to just tell them, no, just be patient, just forget about it. Talk them through it and explain your reasons for why that's not the end of the world.
Okay. I agree with that distinction. That's good.
So
go on.
I was just thinking about some of the other strategies for staying calm and mindful. One thing that has been really helpful for me is what William Irvin mentions in A Guide to the Good Life. So this is a great introduction to Stoic philosophy for anyone who's not already familiar with it. And he recommends doing negative and projective visualization. So these are strategies to kind of make ourselves more thankful for what we have for our children. So I adapt it with negative visualization. This is something that you can do, if you have 5 minutes on a weekend morning. We're all so busy and rushing around all the time, right? But, if you can just carve out 5 minutes sometime and think about, okay, so, what if I sent my child to stay with relatives for a few weeks? At first, you'd probably think, oh, okay, I can breathe now. I have time to sleep in the morning or do whatever I want. But eventually, you'd really feel kind of a hole missing in your home. We don't often give our kids credit for bringing all the life and joy and happiness. It's easy to lose that appreciation for them in the daily grind. So doing an exercise like this helped you to kind of step back, take a deep breath, and remember what's so wonderful about doing this in the first place.
I try to do that. I try to do that all the time. It makes baby care a bit easier.
Yeah, it really does. Because if you lose sight of the big picture and why you're doing this in the first place, you start to get depressed. Little things seem bigger than they really are. So it's really important to keep the right perspective on life, but also on parenting. Another exercise I like is the view from above, which Marcus Aurelius recommends. If you can take a few minutes, you can also do this in 30 seconds if you're angry with your child about something, you zoom out, it's like you're on Google Earth or something, and you're zooming out and you can see the whole world. Think about, how many people are out there right now, how many kids are misbehaving. It really puts it in perspective, because it's easy to feel like everything bad is happening to just you. And it's not true at all. Every parent has to deal with these things. Everyone is trying to do the best they can. So I think, just realizing for a minute, hey, this is a normal part of life. My kid's normal. I'm normal. It's not the end of the world. So again, it's about kind of reframing your judgments to understand the big picture.
So how do you think Tranquility Parenting helps parents and children to flourish? And what is flourishing? Let's define that for anyone who's not familiar with it.
Yeah, well, I guess you could define it in different ways. To me, it's a part of the eudaimonia, which I mentioned earlier. Yep. It's the idea that you have the best mindset available to a person. You're wise, you're happy, you're grateful for what you have a sense of proportion about life. So I think that's our ideal. Maybe no one will ever reach the ideal. The ancient Stoics were pretty honest about, no one's probably going to ever reach this. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. There's value in having that ideal there, so we have something to orient ourselves. We have a path to walk on and get towards that goal. Do you have any thoughts on flourishing? Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. I was just thinking, it's an awfully tall order to be a sage in Stoicism, so no wonder that no one meets that ideal.
Yeah. But I think that when you're in the right place mentally, you enjoy your kids so much more. Yeah. And it's kind of a paradox of parenting to me, that when you are calm and you're enjoying being with your kids, they behave so much better.
Yeah, they feel what you're feeling.
Yes, exactly. And it sounds obvious when you say it like that, but it took me a long time to figure that out. Before I knew about Stoicism, I would always, I'd get frustrated with my kids. And I felt like when I was at my worst, they always misbehaved the most. I was always like, can't you, I'm so stressed out. I need you to behave right now. Why are you acting worse than usual? Yeah. And eventually I noticed the pattern. It's when I was at my worst that they were at their worst. And then it dawned on me, okay, wait a minute. So I'm actually causing this behavior inadvertently. And on the flip side, I've noticed, when I'm in the right place mentally and I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing at that moment, my kids are great. So I think the more that we can get into that right place, being calm, mindful, and engaged, the better our kids behave too.
I don't know if that's true for me. It kind of depends, I think. But at least if I'm sort of engaged and mindful, as you put it, I can deal with it regardless. If my son tantrums or something like that, or I'm better able to deal with it.
That also.
Yeah. So you mentioned at the end there's and there's some scenarios, I guess, for how to deal with specific problems, but what other practical ideas does the book have for dealing with for the types of issues that parents tend to struggle with?
Well, I wanted to make it really practical and relevant for everyone. So at the end of every chapter, I have some chapter takeaways. So I try to summarize the chapter for parents who are sleep deprived and busy.
Yeah.
So if it doesn't, right. So if it doesn't all soak in at first, you can just go for the bullet points at the end, and also some exercises. So at the end of each chapter is what I call make it your own. The Stoics have always said, this is not about the theory, it's about you putting it into practice in your life. So I really wanted to bring that to everybody. Even if you don't buy all the Stoic principles, that's fine. You can still use some of the techniques and figure out how to apply it to your life. So yes, and I also tried to make it relevant for older kids as well. Even though my kids are still pretty young right now, they're 2, 4, and 6. Yeah. It's the kind of thing, it applies to adults, it applies to children, it applies to teenagers. Yeah. You can literally adapt it for anyone. And I think also the same techniques can be used by teachers or babysitters or, anyone who's
Yeah.
working with children. It doesn't actually have to be parents.
Yeah. I mean, very good. Yeah, you mentioned some specifics and scenarios already for dealing with
Yeah, like potty training, that was in my house, that has always been a big one. Dealing with tantrums, and that's an example that I use a lot throughout the book because it's such a big one for parents
Yeah.
because we feel kind of like social outcasts. And I think in general, that's kind of a problem with parenting today is we're used to being competent adults, right? Before we have kids. And then all of a sudden, when you have a kid, you go out in public. If your child does something childish, everybody stares daggers at you. It's like suddenly you become a social pariah just because you have who's behaving like a kid, right? So I think, regulating your emotions in that way is kind of the first step to tranquility. You have to kind of disregard what other people might be thinking. As long as you're doing your best, you can't control your child. So you want to take steps, before you go out. Okay, prepare your child, make sure they're not tired, talk to them about what you're going to do, make sure you have a habit of not giving in to all of their impulses, things like that. But once you've done what you can do, there's absolutely no reason for you to feel guilty just because you have a child like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful. People stare daggers at That's funny. There's some restaurants who like bar children from coming in or
Yeah. I mean, we have a very adult-oriented society. I talked about this in the last video, and I think that's one reason why parents are so stressed is because we don't really have much support. It's like when I became a stay-at-home mom, I went from, having an interesting, fulfilling career, and suddenly I was at home changing diapers all day. It's not that I didn't like spending time with my kids, but it feels like you have to give up a lot in order to spend time with your kids. You have to give up your hobbies in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Kids are very expensive, of course. You have to change travel plans, things like that. So I think, for me at least, what I experienced was kind of a major disruption. And Stoicism helped me understand, you don't have to go to the fancy restaurants. You don't have to travel around the world in order to be a good person, have a fulfilling life, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's it's a good philosophy for Americans and stuff. And I don't want to say that we're so narcissistic, but I mean, like prior generations to travel around the world. I try to think of it. I was thinking about that too. But if you think about it in terms of prior generations, I mean, like being able to travel around the world was like an immense privilege. Now it's people sort of take it. I love travel too. Don't get me wrong, but like people kind of take it as something that should be is more of a given than something that should be a like kind of a privilege. I mean, yeah, I don't know if people used to be more inclined towards really hard work or the hard work that parenting entails or not, but I think it's good that people become or change their mindset in response to those types of things.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, our standard of living in a lot of cases has risen so high.
Yeah.
We have machines to do a lot of things that people used to have to do by hand.
Yes.
Life has gotten very pleasant in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I totally understand why some people wouldn't want to have kids. I mean, that's a reasonable decision because you're going from one standard of living to another. For those of us who do decide to have kids, we understand that it's worth it. But I think, yes, because we have such a high standard of living today, that's what kind of makes it seem so disruptive. And expectations too.
Yeah.
First, the Stoics are famous for helping us manage our expectations. So that's another thing that's also very helpful. Don't expect to go on a round the world trip with a 1-year-old, right? And then you won't be disappointed when it doesn't happen. Yeah. Don't expect to go a whole day with your child behaving perfectly. Yeah. If you expect that, you're going to be disappointed. Yeah. You won't be prepared to handle any problems. So if you do kind of a premeditation of adversity in the morning, that helps you be mentally prepared. Okay, I know my kid doesn't like to get his shoes on, so I'm ready to deal with this problem.
Yeah, very good. So where can people order the book? And it just came out, right? Or was it January 7th? Or
yes,
is that tomorrow? Is that tomorrow?
Yes, it's
Oh,
supposed to be tomorrow.
oh wow. So this is well timed.
Yes, so it's available on Amazon tomorrow. I think it might be available starting in February from the publisher.
Okay.
And you can actually get a 30% discount off the cover price if you order directly from the publisher, which is Roman and Littlefield. So it's www.roman, and that's ROWMAN.com.
Okay.
And I have a discount code. Maybe you could put it in the notes
Yeah, I
to
will.
the
I
video.
will.
So yes, you can get 30% off if you order through them. Otherwise, it's available pretty much anywhere you would buy books online.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to finishing it, so I hope other people will be excited as well. I didn't realize, so
Yes.
I forgot that tomorrow was the release date, so you must be excited. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. I hope it'll be useful for people. It's made such a difference in my life, so I really hope that at least a few other people will find it useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very good, Brittany. And for anyone watching, if you like this type of content, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get all of the videos that I publish, which is somewhere among the order of 5 per year or maybe more in the future. I don't know. But yeah, thank you, Brittany. This has been great.
Thank you so much.